Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Very good. So you start the
Maria,
meeting.
can we start?
Yes, I think we can start.
Uh, so we have a small introduction session, sir.
Yes.
So, Maria,
Yes, sir. Yes. Sh- shall I start, sir?
Yes,
yes,
please.
please.
Anyone who stops learning is old, whether at 20 or 80. Anyone who keeps learning stays young. The greatest thing in life is to keep your mind young. Good evening to all who have gathered here for today's webinar. Respected dignitaries, faculties, and my dear friends, we have gathered here to be enlightened by the eminent personality, Professor Dr. Ulrich Hemmel, who is the director of Global Ethic Institution and Institution of Weltos Foundation, University of Tübingen, Germany, on the topic Economical Idea and Social Market Economy as a Peace Project based on the new encyclical Fratelli Tutti of Pope Francis, organizing in memory of His Excellency Right Reverend Archbishop Dr. Daniel Acharu Parambil, who was the Archbishop of Archdiocese of Virapalli and was the patron of our institution, St. Albert College Autonomous. So before we begin, let's start with a prayer. As prayer should not be regarded as a duty which must be performed, but it is a privilege to be in terms of friendship with God. So now I request Ansa Mary Jacob to lead us in prayer.
Hello? There shall be showers of blessing. This is the promise of love. There shall be seasons refreshing, sent from the Savior above. Showers of blessing, showers of blessings we need. Mercy drops from the are falling, but for the showers we plead.
Thank you, Ansa, for helping us to see God in a more stronger faith. Welcoming the guest is our Indian culture, which shows our warmth and gratitude. It's a pleasant evening to welcome our special guest. So I invite Dr. Jitin Benedict, Assistant Professor, Albertian Institute of Management, to welcome the gathering.
Thank you, Ramil. Am I audible enough, Ramil?
Yes, sir, yes.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Welcoming you all to Archbishop Daniel Acharu Parambil Memorial International Lecture Series, organized by International Affairs and Albertian Institute of Management. This is the 6th webinar in the series commemorating our dearest Archbishop Daniel Acharu Parambil, who was a great visionary and a virtuous soul. Most of the societal and educational reforms that we witness today is the foresight of this legend. Today we have with us Professor Dr. Ulrich Hemmel, Director, Global Ethic Institute, and also the Director of Welthos Foundation. We are deeply honored to have you with us today, and with a very big heart, welcoming you to this session, sir. We also have with us Professor Dr. Gio Jose Fernandez, Dean, International Affairs and Albertian Institute of Management, who was instrumental in making this webinar series happen. With great pleasure, inviting you to this session, sir. The program is coordinated by Mr. Joby Vergas, a young bloke who is very dynamic and very vibrant. Joby, welcoming you to this session. Dear youngsters, participants, students, the topic of today's webinar is economic ideas and social market economy as a peace project based on the new encyclical Fratelli Tutti of Pope Francis. I'm very sure that we'll all reap the benefit to the fullest from this session. Once again, welcoming you all. I remain. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your most delighted and hospitable welcome. Education breeds confidence. Confidence breeds hope. Hope breeds peace. Now, I'm extremely honored to introduce Professor Dr. Ulrich Hemmel, who is a German Catholic theologian, founder of the Institute for Social Strategy, business consultant, manager, and entrepreneur. He studied Catholic theology, philosophy, and economics, and social science in Mainz and Rome. He wrote a scientific theory of religious education, which was later counted among the 25th classic of the 20th century for this subject. Based on entrepreneurial practice, he wrote the book Value and Values, which was named Business Book of the Year 2005. He was awarded with Papal Gold Medal in 1972 as the best of his year in the licentiate course in economics and social science at the Pontifical Gregorian University, Rome. In 2003, he was named Manager of the Year by the Federal Association of Germany Management Consultants. So now, without any delay, I invite Honorable Professor Dr. Ulrich Hemmel to take over the session. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very pleased and very honored to be with you, and I'm very happy to be here in a universal community, so to say, because sending a voice from Europe, but it's not only from Europe, it's really from all over the world. Now, what are we talking about? We are talking about the idea of how organizing our society in such a way that we can live together peacefully. This is a major point, not only in Europe, but also in India, as you all know. We have religious diversity, we have economic diversity, and even challenges. So how can we do that? This is the main question asked also not only by ourselves, but also by Pope Francis. And an encyclica, by the way, is simply the name for a letter to all of us. So encyclica simply means a letter to all of us. And Fratelli Tutti simply means we are all brothers and sisters. Fratelli really in Italian is the term for brothers, but in an inclusive manner, so it is brothers and sisters. So, and there's another background I would like to mention. I'm coming here from Germany, and Germany had been destroyed completely after the Second World War. This country now has 83 million people, and after the Second World War, we had 14 million refugees coming from other parts, the eastern parts of the country, and out of them 2 million died because it was winter, and so 12 million came to a country of, let me say, at that time 60 million people. This was a huge stress, a huge situation, and the cities have been bombed because Germany had started a useless war, but the cities have been bombed by the English and American airplanes, and people have been there without shelter in one of the coldest winters of the last century. So there was a huge movement of how to build up this country. Of course, there have been skilled people, but nevertheless, the chaos was huge. And one of the guiding ideas at that moment in time was the idea of a social market economy. What does that mean? It means really in a nutshell, and if you want to learn something from that, I think this is the nutshell to be learned. It means how can we combine the path for finding the best solution in the market using competition, because competition is a problem-solving device, and combining that with social minimum standards. So no hunger, shelter, access to clean water, access to healthcare for everybody. And with this question in mind, they developed a theory which is called social market economy. And the reason why I put this together here in the presentation is that this social market economy had been built at that time also on the roots of the Christian social doctrine, which has been formulated by the popes also before. Why is it so? I tell you the story. It's a funny story, though, because, 150 years ago, we had industrialization. And with this industrialization, there was a lot of oppression and really lousy working conditions. Nevertheless, in France, in Germany, we had some Catholic entrepreneurs, and some of them, energetic people, went to Rome and said, hey, Pope, you cannot continue like that. And so really, in the year 1891, there was the first encyclica of a Pope, Leo XIII, and it was called Rerum Novarum, which means new things are happening. What does it mean? It was the time of the industrialization 130 years ago, and at that time people could not live from their wages. It was simply impossible. Partly you have that in some urban areas in India still today, in Europe as well. Europe is not as rich as people always think. There's a lot of diversity in there as well. So what he said at that time, 1891, was, well, everybody should have a right to work, first thing, and second, he should be able to maintain himself and his family with what he earns from that work. This was the idea which was well promoted in 1891. And then more or less, every pope has written social encyclicals. So in 1931, and then also John Paul II, and now also Pope Francis. Pope Francis with two important encyclicals. One is called Laudato Si, which means praised be you, and it is the chant of Holy Francis, who was very much connected to nature and preserving nature. And so this was the first encyclica to highlight the ecological benefit of today's world. So this was the important thing there. And now the encyclica Fratelli Tutti, where he really aims at fostering what he calls social friendship. So the real idea behind is combining ecological and economic rationality and finding out how we can do that in a complex society. And now in my thesis, what I want to present you now in the following minutes is to show you how to do that in an economic and social context, and not only based on this country, but on a worldwide idea. But for doing so, we have to ask questions. So we have to ask the question, what do we expect from state? What do we expect from economy? And then we have to see what is the world we live in. We have a global civil society. This is a new concept. The civil society very often is seen in an unilateral manner. And one of the targets of this lecture for you today is to learn a new concept of civil society. I'll come back to that in a minute. But one thing is quite sure. Today, we already live not only in a local or regional, but even in a global civil society. And I give you a very simple reason. Look at the COVID-19 pandemic. If that is not a reason to understand that we live in one world, what else? We have the climate change and climate crisis. If that is not a reason to understand that it is one world, what else? So we have a lot of things which really are happening at the same time in this world, and which are challenging the civil societies in our countries due to a global finance, due to the global trend to digitalization, due to the global challenge of inequality, the global challenge of migration and climate crisis. Imagine that even today we have 150 or 160 million people not living in the country where they were born and working in another country. And on top, we have 70 million of people who live as refugees. So altogether, this is 3% of the world population. But for the first category, it's only those who work. So with their families, it's much more. And giving you another figure, we have countries in this world, like, for example, Haiti, but also Kyrgyzstan, where 30% of the gross domestic product is being produced by workers from that country who send money with Western Union or other agents back to the country. So this is a big, big thing. And it is one of the effects of the Corona crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, that these transfer payments have been lowered a lot. And one of the other effects is that the people living in poverty, and poverty here is defined by less than $2 per person per day. So this really is not a lot. $2 per person per day. Yeah, the number of people suffering from that degree of poverty will increase or has increased really in the last year from 690 million people to 830 million people worldwide. So all that means, yes, we live in one world, but if we live in one world, then we have also to understand how can we shape this world? How can we live together in a good way? Now, I want to tell you another concept, because normally we are talking very simply about the idea of globalization. But what really is globalization? Now, I would like you to maintain 3 levels of globalization. One level is very simple. It's a level of devices and products and services. So products and services coming from one country to another, having a long value chain. This is the first level of globalization, goods and services. There's a second level of globalization, which we are experiencing right now. This is the digital communication and information flow. And this is spreading all over the world. But what happens, and if you are interested in a value-based society, we always forget a third level of globalization. It is the globalization of norms and of values. And it is logical. If we consider what I have been telling you before, that we have 160 million people working in a country where they have not been born, of course, these people bring their own values to a country. If you are born in India and you come to Germany, you will not forget your family. How could you? You will have your values, your traditions. You will have Diwali. You will find it interesting that the Germans have a pine tree in their living rooms on Christmas, but you know that already. Yeah? But you know, these are things where we come to encounter things, but it's the the globalization of norms and values. Are there common values in there? Yes, there are. If you look at the worldwide trend, we have 3 values where I really can say these values are very, very high. It is the value of fairness. It is the value of transparency, transparent information. And third is the value of good communication. If you have that, we talk of good governance, but this is a further concept. But these 3, fairness, transparency, and communication, obviously are values really all over the world. You can experience that in many, many countries. So I have now been talking about globalization, about global civil society. Now I would like to talk about the state, because what is the state? We are all living in states. We have passports. We have our ideas about what the state should be doing. But generally speaking, all of us, you know, we are living in a human culture. And a human culture means that we have some ideas in our mind, some pictures in our minds, something like what I call a mental landscape, or at least a mental architecture. And now also learning in the university and learning in such a course is quite important to understand what kind of mental architecture is in my mind. Is it in my mind that people are of the same value? They have the same dignity? Yes or no? Is it in my mind that the state should pay for everything? Yes or no? So if we consider that, we can, as intelligent people, step back one little step and say, what happens here? What is our idea of the state? There can be the idea of the nation state. Look at India. Look at India at the time of Gandhi. It was part of the British Empire. Now, it is good to have access to Great Britain, but I'm quite sure that most Indians really like to have their own state. Even more so. Then you have, it has been split up with Bangladesh and with Pakistan and so on and so on. You all know that much better than I do, but it means, what is our picture? Where do we belong to? And now there are, as always in life, there are some categories. One category is the neoliberal dogma, where you say, okay, the state should do as little as possible and everything should be free. But wait a second, this is the freedom of, you know, if I tell that kind of market freedom, it is an exaggeration. And social market economy, and also the economy as promoted by Pope Francis, is different from that. What is the exaggeration of market economy? Very simple. It's like having a turtle, having a dog, and having a monkey, and having a palm tree. You have the palm tree and you have the coconut on the palm tree, and you tell them, to the dog, to the turtle, and to the monkey, who's up first will get the coconut. As you can see, this does not work. So why does it not work? Well, because a turtle is not good in climbing up palm trees. A dog, not either. A monkey, very well. So we have to face the sheer inequality of human beings, inequality in many, many, many senses. And here again, Pope Francis is very good, because he says, well, if you look at your brother, at your sister, you know very well, we have our creativity, yes, but we also have our vulnerability. We are vulnerable. We can be sick. We can be poor. We can be lacking access to basic needs. So how can we deal with this? So this means that in every good society, we do need a minimum standard for everybody, independent of markets. So this is something where we would say it is a corridor where the markets have been, so there must be a break to the markets, because we need the minimum social standards. And this is different. So the neoliberal framework is not a good idea in the end. The other thing, if you go to the other side of the rainbow, you would find an idea of a paternalistic state. The paternalistic state is something very difficult, because really it means the state knows what is good for you citizens. And if I want to bring about the idea of the paternalistic state, I make something like a thought experiment. What is a thought experiment? It's like simply thinking, because it's easy. Now think about, you all have smartphones, I guess, yeah? And think that now we have a state-governed dress code app. Yeah, so it's an app, and every morning you wake up and the state will tell you, today you will have a white shirt, and so on and so on. Now you can understand this is completely crazy. It does not really work, because the state should not, mingle in what you are dressing. It's your own decision. But of course, in the acceleration, you can understand what really happens. So a paternalistic state tends to forge your behavior in a very narrow manner. We do not want that. So the real point is then, with this rainbow, where is the right balance between an over paternalistic state and an over neoliberal state? Where is the balance? And this is the idea of the social market economy, and also the idea of the state as a democratic arbitrator who sets and implements rules. Let us go ahead. It is the same thing here. How much freedom do we have for each part? It is the part of a state like North Korea, where there's no freedom, or is it a part of the Congo, where you have nearly complete anarchy because there's no functional state? And so the idea is the balance of markets and welfare for all, including social minimum standards. One test question here is the need of a corruption-free environment. Now, you are on a Christian university, and you know about the original sin. If somebody asks me today, what is the translation of original sin? I tell them, well, the translation is that people have a tendency to answer positively to corruption. This is something in us. And so we have to really to struggle within ourselves to do that in a good way. But it's not that easy, because conditions are different, and you know that very well. So now I will moving on to a next concept, which is also important, both for Francis and both for all of us. It means that going back to the mental architecture, we have to change our mental architecture. Very, very often, people see this kind of triangle: the state, business or economy, and the civil society. Especially in the field of NGOs, this is very often. But the problem here is that in this structure, it is easy to look for the good, the bad, and the other one. And very often, the civil society is the good one, the state, you never know, and the economy is the bad one. At least this happens very often here in Europe and also in other countries. So I say, okay, this cannot be a good way of seeing things. So there is a possible change where we could say, we need another picture of civil society. And then the definition is civil society is all that is neither state nor organized crime. So we have the state, we have organized crime, which exists, and we have civil society. And of course, you have some liquid transitions. You have crime, money laundering, and you have states looking for economy, blah, blah, blah. But the advantage is that with this definition, important sectors such as sport, religion, business can be seen as parts of civil society. Now, why is it important? It is really important because If you are a part of civil society, not a counterpart, then you as a company are a responsible actor of civil society. And this is, by the way, what Pope Francis strengthens very much. He says we do have a responsibility and we cannot get rid of this responsibility. But then we also need common rules for that. Now, these are short examples how you can do that, because look at the right side. The gray color is the state. The brown color is the civil society, and the black color would be organized crime. And you may have, of course, different countries. You may have countries where you have a very, very strong state and a relatively, weak civil society. You may have countries where the civil society is stronger. You may have countries where the organized crime is quite strong. And you may have countries where the state beyond is very, very weak. So again, here, the important thing is see corruption. And it would be very interesting for me to know how you see your country, India, with these colors. So nice thing is you can put the concept into that. Now I have to go further. We are in a Christian context. We are in a context also of economy. But if this is the case, and those of you who study economy in the traditional sense will learn about the Homo economicus. This, of course, is a methodological idea where people say, okay, people have a rational choice, and normally they go for the rational choice, which is true. But the truth, the real truth is, it is only part of the truth. Yes, we are for a rational choice, but as a human being, we have both sides in us. We have the rational choice, looking for our benefit, but since the time of Aristotle and other philosophers and religions, we also know that the human being is an, let me say, a zoon politikon, is a political animal. And I would put it now into Christian terms, also terms used by Francis. We are also a homo corporativus. We are a corporation person. So we have both in that. Look at your own behavior, behavior towards your family, towards the university. Where are you more benefit-oriented for yourself? Where are you more cooperation-centered? And we have both in ourselves, and we try to ponder that, to find a balance between both of them. That's quite important. So it means that we have both. We are the benefit maximizer, but we are also the social and political person. And this is important because it means I have created a new discipline called economic anthropology, and it is based on the idea that we have to find that balance. It is our human vulnerability against human creativity. It's our need for belonging to a family, to a group, to a university, and identity, and our need to be unique, individual persons. Now, simply imagine you would go in the shoes of your neighbor. Would not be nice because your feet are different. We are all different. It's nearly the same, but also we are different. And this only seems to be far away from economy. It is not, because from this need of being different, we come to competition. From the need of belonging, we come to cooperation. So from a real Christian-based anthropology, we come to the big institutions of economic life, which are cooperation and competition. And this then is really a sort of a ethics of balance, which means we look for our benefit, but we also look for sense, purpose, social inclusion. We need functional benefit-based action as well as community-driven action and values. And this is what I told you already with the Rerum Novarum, with the anthropology. And there are three terms. If you want to learn something about that, these are the three terms today. And since the last 150 years, it is the person, personality, which is principle number one. Why? Because we count as a person. We are not simply a number. We are not simply a functional entity. No, we are a person loved by God. The second is subsidiarity. The third is solidarity. What is solidarity? Yes, it is also where we need a collective action, where we need the action of the state, for example, or of big groups and institutions like the church or like the trade unions or like political parties. But the real problem here is how do we find a balance between the person and, let me say, the state and other institutions? And one of the answers to that is in the third term, which is called subsidiarity. What does subsidiarity mean? It means if something can be done from a lower level, don't do it at a higher level. If for example, you can decide for your own how you buy your food, nobody should do that for you. If you are in a company, what is a central decision and what is a decentral decision? If you are in an organization like a university, the real point is the good place for responsibility. Which decision has to be taken central, and which decision has to be taken in a decentralized way? Now, for example, the overall program, well, of course, this is university as such. But let me say, the individual lesson, of course, this is on another level. It must be the person who presents and so on and so on. So this is really already in itself a kind of ethics of balance in it. And I think it's important even today, and it has been maintained by all of the popes in the last 150 years. And sometimes it has been even forged into, into laws and into the social rules of a country. So I want to explain a little bit more the terms, because these terms are important even in digital times. And you know all that. Each person has unique identity. We have both freedom and responsibility. We are unique. We are dialogue oriented. We tell stories. We have what we call narrative competence. We are free. And freedom means we are able to steer our lives. We are full of hopes and desires. We are looking for sense and significance. And we are contradictory and are conscious of our own mortality. This is important because it's something which you will not find in artificial intelligence. I've done a lot of research on artificial intelligence, and last year I've been writing a book, but you can see it. It is called Critique of Digital Reason. It means why humanity is the criterion. It is really looking at the digital world from such a perspective. But the interesting thing is with the artificial intelligence, we still are humans because we are contradictory. Programs should not be contradictory, and we know about our mortality and have a long time horizon. Programs don't. You see it from this picture. Look, this is the star should be where we are born. Everybody of us has a birth date, and the cross should be the day when we die. Unfortunately, it is highly probable that all of us die, but hopefully not today, not tomorrow. So, but the cross here is where we live. You are students, so your cross will be normally quite there in the beginning. Mine will be laid more on the right side. So, but we never know really. But the interesting thing is that human beings have a capability of bridging that. We design our lives from the horizon of beyond. How would you like to be in the memory of your loved ones when this day will arrive? And how would you design? What will you do in life? What is the purpose? And this is interesting because our CV then becomes the mirror of our dreams and of our identity. And by the way, this is for those who are older than 40. Another task is looking back, with gratitude and not with anger. Not always easy, but it also means that we have different generations in there. Now, subsidiarity and solidarity. I already talked about vulnerability and creativity, independent from political and economic systems. The balance of freedom and care. We need freedom for creativity and entrepreneurial spirit, but we also need care for times of weakness and social stress. And this is exactly the idea of the social market economy as prescribed in Fratelli Tutti, because it promotes both entrepreneurial spirit, social friendship, and caring in such a kind of balance. And if you do it like that, in the end, you will find out that we are really talking about a peace project. It is a peace project, which means we look for the right place of responsibility. We look for solidarity in the right balance between individual freedoms and social responsibility. And we look for the minimum standards which create in wages, housing, healthcare, education, because this creates social cohesion and trust. And this also includes mechanisms of democratic control, freedoms, economic institutions, constitutional law, and so on. And of course, in today's world, we have some values which are unified in a sense. One of the examples was where the Sustainable Development Goals entered into value on the 1st of January 2016, 5 years ago. And by the way, with the cooperation of the Pope and his experts, because the Pope was speaking to the United Nations in autumn 2015. And you see exactly these aims. And the interesting thing is, big companies in Europe and in the United States are already trying to show to the society their social contribution, their contribution to society. So their contribution to the common good, while referring on their homepages to these 17 sustainable development goals. And by the way, coming from a religious perspective, I would love to have number 18. Number 18 for me would be good religious practice. Good religious practice simply means you have the right to live up to your religion. You have the right to live up to the cultic expression, liturgy, so to say. You have the right to live without any religion. You have the right to change religion in your life, and you should withdraw from cruel and violent religious practice. This could be SDG number 18. One other thing which is interesting in this context is this person, Hans Küng. He already 30 years ago said the one and only world community is in need of compulsory shared norms, ideals, and goals. This is, by the way, the idea of the Global Ethics Initiative, and it has been proclaimed also by a common parliament of world religions. So this parliament of world religions comprised both Christian religion, Hindu, Buddhist, Islam, so really all religions, and they could share common values: 2 principles, principle of humanity and golden rule, and 5 values: non-violence, justice, truthfulness, partnership and gender equality, sustainability and ecological responsibility. So if we look for common values, we do have them in this field. So what is the role of Pope Francis? He is a voice for sustainability, first time from the popes, and in Fratelli Tutti, a voice for international cooperation, because we have lived the situation with Mr. Trump and other relatively egoistic national leaders who say America first, or UK first, or Brazil first, or Hindu first, or whatever. You know that very well, and this is a limitation, and people don't like to live with such limitations. So what he strengthens is the idea of international cooperation, exactly, especially in Fratelli Tutti. What is new? The new is this international cooperation, but also other popes had that. More really new is the concept of social friendship. And the other thing is, look at the victims, starting from a Samaritan. He really makes a sort of a homily, a text on the Samaritan. And now this goes back to what I told you about the vulnerability of human persons. So what can be improved? Of course, we should overcome the dualism between capitalism and socialism. And this is, by the way, the purpose of social market economy as a peace project. Yes, and so if we look at that, I think it's important to understand where we are. I want to leave time also for discussion, so it's only 2 slides left. I think a good economy, a good social life in the 21st century must be global, ethical, and digital. The global aim is a good and peaceful social coexistence between nations, religions, groups, and individuals. So the idea is a world in balance. And a world in balance, of course, also comprises the environmental sustainabilities. And we do have common values as the human rights and minority rights, as tolerance, fairness, and respect. But we should not forget to look also for the peace contribution of religions. Too often in Europe, sometimes also in the United States and other countries, we only look to the violent contribution of religions, in the sense of religions all promise peace, but they really bring violence. But we should endeavor to look for the peace contribution of religions. I think this is our task. And of course, we need to combine that with the global sustainability, which of course explains into resource and material efficiency, protection of biological diversity, common action against climate crisis, and generational justice, which means don't leave the world to your children worse than you have seen it when you have been born. Last slide. This is our challenge, and I'm relatively sure that we can build a new world on that, a new global peace order and a new social market economy on a global scale. And the Encyclica Fratelli Tutti can help us with that. It is a sustainability-based transformation of the economic system, which also means that we have to pay a price for the CO2 consumption that we have, including a social base, with a person as the important reference. And by the way, this also works for the digital world. Digital personality means I decide on my digital identity. Digital solidarity means we need a state who is creating laws and implementing laws against hate speech and fake news and so on, where it is too much and all this. And digital subsidiarity means what is the right place for responsibility again. So this is important because we are human persons and not AI systems, because due to our own human contradictions, we have also our own values, and this includes also values such as beauty, friendship, and love. And Pope Francis talks about that. He talks about that sometimes in a poetic, not very much business-like language, and it leads to a culture of mutual respect and recognition. And this is the idea. And it's, honestly speaking, the idea behind this old man's text of Fratelli Tutti. Let's go together for a new global peace order. And let's do that also in the field of economy. And by the way, it's not impossible. I could tell you much more about the tangible things which have to be done, like unemployment insurance, like old age insurance, like dual formation. So the interesting thing is, with the social market economy, these poetic thoughts can be transferred to a social reality, and it is part of the German reality with a lot of problems we do have. But yes, it is also part of what we are doing. Thank you very much. This is the presentation, and I would now give it back to Georgios Fernandez for our common discussion, please.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Hemel. If you have any question, please do ask. Dear participants, you could either put the question on the chat box, or you could ask directly.
Hello.
Hello? Yes, I can see you.
Yes, sir. My question is, like, within the development of sustainability, will it create more job opportunities?
I think so. I think so, but job opportunities, by the way, are a matter of entrepreneurs, and we need. I'm the head of the German Federation of Catholic Entrepreneurs. We have more than 1,000 companies behind that. There is also a world association for that, the UNIAPAC. Who are they? They are entrepreneurs based on Christian values. And we have made a document which shows the entrepreneur as a noble vocation. This does not mean that you have rogues as entrepreneurs, that you have criminal practices. But what we have to maintain is the good picture of the purposeful entrepreneur, and an entrepreneur creating jobs, because that's his task. Of course, economy changes, and with the artificial intelligence, some jobs will be left, but other jobs will be created. And in these big transformations, we normally have seen a change of jobs, a destruction of some jobs, but also creation of new jobs. This is part of the world. But I'm relatively optimistic, because many new professions have come to life in the last 20 years, even in the last 10 years. For example, SEO engineer or SEM engineer, you know, all this software stuff, or social marketing, social media engineering. This is completely new. Yes, it is completely new, and I'm sure it will create jobs, but it is a big challenge. It's also a big challenge, which you know from India as the Malthusian challenge. Malthus was one author you probably know, and he said, well, if your productivity in the fields, in the rural fields, grows by 5% every year, so sorry, still this is a linear growth. But if you have an exponential growth of your population, there will be a gap. And there is a discussion on that since 150 years. And I'm still convinced that this earth can really be a good place for all of us. Sorry, we have too much snow here. It's a little bit cold. So we have too much, we can live up to that, but it's a big challenge. And it's also a challenge of creating access to healthcare and access to education. I give you a third point, which maybe is not you are not aware of. We call that the so-called demographic transition. What is that? My grandmother had 12 children. So you would think, oh, what is that? And so very many children. Why? Because at that time we had a perinatal mortality, which means the mortality around birth and the mortality in the first year and in the first 5 years of your life, which has been very, very high. So without thinking intellectually, but sort of from the belly, people knew, well, if I want to survive, I must have 5, 6, 10, 12 children. And now with the new conditions of hygiene and modern medicine, this becomes better and better. So, but it takes normally 1 or 2 generations until that really translates into behavior. For example, Latin America, already this has come. In Africa, in some countries it has come, in others not. Other countries still have more than 4 persons births per woman in an average. So India already is in this transition, but a little bit later than other countries. So your population still is there, and you have the big problem of creating enough jobs and creating enough space. But I think you can. I'm optimistic that the Indian society can deal with this challenge. So this is a short answer to that.
Thank you, sir.
Any more questions? So this is just for the discussion basis. The Fraternity basically suggests to welcome countries' migrants. Now, if you look at today, let's take an example of Middle East, where the nationalism has come into picture, where the nationalization of the organizations or giving jobs to nationals has become more priority. So what is your take on this?
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, people are intelligent. And I have been, for example, in Saudi Arabia, just as an example. And of course, you have a lot of Filipinos over there and from other countries, and also from India, of course, especially Pakistan. Well, but what happens is many of these people still in the petrol age, they are not ready to do certain kind of works. So there is a need, and the population cannot be maintained like that. Still, I think that's the reason why I say we need also a human rights issue. We need to have minimum standard. What I say, what is social minimum standards? It can also be a social minimum standard for work security. It can be a social minimum standard for social security. So you should not, in these countries, you have your visa for 1 year, then you have to go home, or you have to extend that. And if you reach the age of 60, it cannot be extended. So this means, economically speaking, that externalization of the cost of aging population to other countries. You can do that, but it's not fair. And this is, by the way, one thing which I made, one point I made in this conference, to say fairness and transparency and communication really are high values. This is not my invention. It is really high because people say this is not fair. And by the way, what are you doing? You are sort of asking this question because you feel it is not fair to do it in this way. The other thing is, the other, look again at the rainbow. If you look to my country here, we have been a little bit, well, blue-eyed, so to say, in the literal sense of the word. People have accepted here, yes, 2 million refugees from Syria. They are all of a Muslim. Most of them are Islamic, but this is a Christian country, so this is not easy to deal with this. So we have to find solutions for every country. But I think if we have, with these SDGs and also with good business practice, we have a relatively good standard. You cannot maintain it like that. Look at the Rana Plaza scandal. This was in Pakistan, you know that. There was a big fire in a textile factory in, I think it was in Pakistan, or was it in Bangladesh, I'm not sure. And people died there. But the big controversial issue was in Europe and in the United States. They say, okay, because you are producing your garments at such a cheap price without sufficient work security, this does not work anymore. And in this year 2021, we are discussing a supply chain law which obliges the companies to take care also for, let me say, their suppliers, which is interesting. And the same will come sooner or later also to the Middle East. Maybe later, but it will come, because we live in one world and you cannot continue like in the past. Even the petrol, in the petrol age, they start to do solar city and all these things. So very often these developments come a little bit later, but they will come. So here you can be quite confident, I guess, also for economic reasons, by the way.
So there is a question that has been put across in the chat box. The question is, when the Pope says, let us dream as a single human family, is he proposing a form of universalism? Should we all be equal?
I think, yes, he does. He certainly does. And he justifies that with the idea of the human person. Person is the center, as image of God. And one thing, when I was a boy, of course, people, they told me, those who are not baptized will go to hell. This was the education at that time. And I thought, this is really a pity for all the people in China or in Africa, or whatever we thought, Now, today, nobody thinks like that. We say, if God really is the principle of universal love, God will know how to deal with this challenge. Still, we are faithful in our faith, but we know that we are one human family, and the Pope knows that as well. In that sense, he is a universalist in the pure sense of the word. Yes, you can read it from the text.
So there is another question being asked. That is, why does the Pope address the themes of populism and liberalism in a document on fraternity? Why should we know a Pope's political opinion?
Very good question. And the question behind, the issue behind that question is, how political should faith be? And how political should a Pope be, a religious leader be? This is controversial, to be honest. And but of course, you see that also in the history of the Church. Pope Benedict has been a very much theological Pope, so to say, with not a lot of political sense. Now, this Pope has a lot of political sense. And he's not so deep in theology as Pope Benedict. But look, in the end, we are persons. Even popes are persons, and they express their personality. Now, what should not be the case is that faith is transferred into a political party. This really is going too much. And of course, there is sometimes a controversy, but generally speaking, for the social doctrine of the Church, there is a lot of positive sentiment around the world from the universities, from the politicians, who say, yes, we do agree, but we have that and that and that challenge, that and that and that difficulty. Of course, if you say, why does he say that? I think his real point is against populism is that this divides, because as a faith leader, as a Christian leader, he's for the unity, and he does everything to divide, to prevent division. And populism, this is the concept, the context also in the text, is that it creates a division. And then the next point is division may be prone to create violence. So if you want non-violence, prevent too much division. And even I give you an economic reason to that. Some of you know the Gini coefficient. And the Gini coefficient means you take the population, the top 20%, next 20, and so on, and the lowest 20%. And then, for example, if the top 20% earn $100,000 per year, just as an example, and the lowest 20% earn $10,000 per year, the Gini coefficient would be 10. It's 10 times more. If it is 1 to 100,000, it's 100. And with this idea, Gini has created a coefficient of social inequality. And with this coefficient of social inequality, then other researchers have measured the amount of social stress. And not surprisingly so, they found out the higher you have inequality in the sense of the Gini coefficient, the stronger you will feel social stress in the organizations, in societies. This, by the way, then is one of the good reasons for Pope Francis to say, prevent too much inequality and prevent populism creating, let me say, too much division and eventually even a violence in some parts of the population. This is the background for that.
Thank you, sir. Is there any more questions? If you don't have any questions, okay. So there is another question being asked, that is, can you please share how this Fratelli Tutti is going to be important to Asia?
A very good question, and I think the answer is all within you. You have been doing the first step. The first step is make it a topic, make it an issue of the academic universe, and you have done that. Now we are discussing about this text, and the text is, let me say, it's easy to read on the one hand side. On the other hand side, it is difficult to analyze because it mixes up the Samaritan part, narration with some economic analysis. How to bring that into Asia? I think it is, you can make reading groups. It is not difficult to read. It's not very technical to read. And this may be even part of the criticism that the Pope is not using very much of a technical language in that. Still, the ideas are very clear. How to bring it to Asia? I think we must bring it to Asia in a sense of inclusiveness. And I even can go back to the text, because in this text, and this is quite unique for a papal encyclica, he refers to all persons of goodwill. And he, explicitly refers to one Muslim leader whom he met before. So he says, for these social affairs, we can work together with others. We don't need to work only with ourselves as Christians. So in that sense, the encyclica Fratelli Tutti is perfect for having a dialogue also with people from other religions. But it is up to you from such universities, from public places, to discuss that generally. And I would even love to have it in the diocese as part of the adult education program. Because the simple idea is, what is the society where we wish to live? I think it's a very, very important question. And this is the point where we have to go. Thank you. I cannot see you, Mr. Fernandez. Yes, now I can see.
Hello.
Yes.
So is there any more questions? If not, it's already 1 hour. We have requested 1 hour's time of Professor Dr. Hemel, so it's already 1 hour. So if there are, we would like to take the last question, and if there are none, Maria, we will continue with the program.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. These measures will have an impact put forth by you, and your delivery is much appreciable. Appreciation is a wonderful thing. It makes what is excellent in others belong to us as well. The vital part of the program is the vote of thanks. So now I invite Jeevan Anthony, the student coordinator, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate that. And I think the point is really, in the end, the human person in dignity. And dignity means recognize each other, look at the eyes of each other, and understand that the other person is a human person. And this is the specific contribution, by the way, also of Christian faith. It combines, let me say, heaven and earth. It combines the individual benefit with the social benefit. And this bridging of the individual good and the common good, this is the basic impact of Pope Francis' Fratelli Tutti, and also of this idea of the social market economy as a peace project. Thank you very much for your preparation. I think you have been excellent in preparing that. It took a certain time until finding out how we can do it. Thank you very much. I wish you all the success for your studies and also for your personal life. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Jeevan, could you please propose a vote of thanks to our guest?
Yes, sir. Respected dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, A very good day to all. It gives me an immense pleasure to deliver the vote of thanks for this event to all dignitaries assembled here. I'd like to thank our chief guest, Professor Dr. Ulrich Hamel, who honored this function with his inspirational thoughts on economy and a global world, mental forming, importance of corruption, personality, value of fraternity, and many more. I would like to thank our beloved Dean, Dr. Georgios Fernandez, faculties, students, participants, volunteers, last but not the least, our beloved audience, for making this function as a grand success. Once again, I thank one and all present here. Thank you.
So let me put it on record to show our gratitude for accepting our invitation to be a part of our International Memorial Lecture Series in the name of His Grace, Dr. Daniel Acharya Parambil. And so, as a gratitude and as a token of appreciation, we are planting 10 trees on your name in the Himalayan region so as to protect the ecology as well as to have or to provide a livelihood to the villagers who plant that. So we will be sharing the certificate and the photographs of the planted trees to you in a day or two's time, so that even with the coordinates, you could look at your tree every 3 months. We'll be updating the photographs, so you could look at the trees picture also. So every 3 months, and the location would also be given to you, the longitude and the latitude. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, and have a good time.
Thank you, sir. And it's a request to every participant, please fill the feedback form so that we could share the feedback with the guest also.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Jeevan, for hosting the most responsible part of the webinar. With this, we come to the end of the webinar. Have a pleasant evening. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you.